to start off with, maybe taking you back to a memory that you've tried to push to the side. How many of you have ever had an awkward moment or been in an awkward situation? Anyone? Okay, there's way more than that. I'm pretty sure all of us can put up our hand. Jason has 2 hands up. I consider myself a little bit of an awkward person, so I feel like I constantly find myself in these situations. It just happens, life can be awkward. People can be awkward. One of the things that I find most awkward is when you're hanging out with your couple friends, and it's a good time, you're all having fun, you're all talking, and all of a sudden they get into an argument in front of you. And you're just like, what do I do in this moment? Do I walk away? Do I get involved in the argument and pick a side? Do I, try to change the conversation? It's just an awkward experience for everybody. Another one that has happened to me many, many times is when you're in a group of people and you start telling a story, and then halfway through you realize no one is listening to you. Everyone's talking to one another, they're all doing their own thing, and so you kind of just slowly get quieter and quieter and stop talking and hope that no one noticed that you were even telling a story in the first place. Or, this actually happened to me a couple weeks ago, the worst is when you wave at someone and you think you know them and then you realize you don't. How many people has that happened to recently? That happened to me in Timber a couple weeks ago, and I just ran past them because I didn't want to make eye contact at all. It's awkward, right? And what's our automatic response when something's awkward? I don't know about you, but for me, I take out my phone, I start scrolling, I pretend that Nathan is calling me or something because I just don't want to be in that situation anymore. Well, today's topic, for some of you, might feel a little bit awkward. It might make you a bit uncomfortable. But my hope is that instead of taking out your phone and scrolling, instead of going into the bathroom and hiding for the next 20 minutes or so, that instead you would really dive in and try to understand, because this is a topic that we can't afford to ignore. It's the topic of lust. Now, right now at Archetype, we are in a series called Little Devils, where we're going through what's called the 7 deadly sins. And in the past couple weeks, we've covered pride and we've covered greed, and today we're moving on to lust. So admittedly, this isn't something we love talking about, right? It kind of makes us feel a little, I don't really like this. And when it comes to lust, a lot of us try to kind of hide that part of our lives. We'd like to push it down, sweep it under the rug, pretend it doesn't exist. But that's exactly why it's so deadly. It's because we don't talk about it. And then when it comes up, we don't know how to deal with it. Jesus talked a lot about lust. In a lot of his discussions with people and a lot of the messages that he preached, he brought up lust. And in the verse that we're going to be looking at today, it comes from the Sermon on the Mount. This is a famous sermon of Jesus's. And in the sermon, he talks about some of the values of the kingdom of God, things that we should do if we want to be part of God's kingdom. And he covers a lot of topics. We don't have time to go through all of them right now. But specifically, I want to look at the part where he talks about lust. And it's in Matthew 5, verse 27 to 30. It says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." Kind of harsh, right? Jesus, come on. Now, I think we all know that adultery is bad. When you hear of a celebrity cheating on their spouse, or maybe someone in your life, you're like, that's not cool, man. That is definitely wrong. I think we can all collectively agree that adultery is wrong, right? But here, Jesus is going a step further. He's saying, no, not only is adultery wrong, not as only is this action of cheating wrong, but even looking at someone with lust is sinful. Which, if that's true, then that means that a lot more of us are guilty than we thought. So what is lust? What is it? Well, I went to Google because that's where you find all your information, and I looked up the definition, and it says lust is a very strong sexual desire. A very strong sexual desire. Hold up. Are we saying that sexual desire is wrong? Is that what Jesus is saying in this verse? The good news is no. We are human. We are sexual beings. We all have this desire in us. That in itself is not wrong. Jesus is saying it's when sexual desire is wrongfully directed and followed by lust that it gets us in trouble. He's saying that it's when sexual desire is wrongfully directed and followed by lust that it becomes a problem. Another definition that I found for lust is a craving for something or someone in a way that becomes unhealthy or obsessive. A craving for something or someone in a way that becomes unhealthy or obsessive. And if we look at this definition here, then that means that lust does not just apply to sexual desire, which in most cases, that's where we see it occurring. But that means it actually applies to a bunch more things. In fact, the word that Jesus uses in the Bible for lust just means a strong longing. So if that's the case, then we can lust after a lot of things. Lust can happen when you are lusting after someone's possessions, after what someone has, maybe the money that they have or the job they have, and it makes you miserable when you think about it. Lust can happen when you are lusting after power, a position, some sort of job, being the best, and you make that your priority. So if you're here thinking, Avery, come on, I don't struggle with lust. That's not a thing for me. Maybe you need to take a step back and look at some of the other areas in your life where lust has crept in, because it's not always as obvious as you think. Going back to the verse, it says, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So here Jesus is pointing out that lust goes beyond just action. It's not just doing something, that it actually starts in the heart. It's not an outward problem. It's an inward problem. And we can come up with all the excuses that we want. Well, I know I shouldn't be looking at this, but at least I'm not actually doing it. At least there's a screen between me and this. We can try to justify ourselves, but the reality is that Jesus knows your heart. He knows what you're thinking when you're looking at that person. He knows what you're doing when you're in your room alone at home. He knows how much you secretly envy that friend and how much it consumes you. And when you let lust into your heart, when you give it even an inch, it opens you up to this world that is incredibly hard to escape from. It's easy to get in it, but it's hard to get out. James 1:14-15 says, but each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. See, James is using this birth analogy to show us how one thought, one little thing that we let into our minds can turn into this bigger thing. It starts with one thought, but then it turns into lust. And then this lust turns into sin, into action. And eventually it gives birth to death. It might start with something small. You may think, no, this isn't a big deal. But it can quickly spiral into something bigger. You're getting close to an edge where it's very easy to fall off of. How many of you guys have been to the Grand Canyon before in Arizona? Okay, not that many of you guys apparently. Well, I definitely recommend that you should go. I went a few years ago with my family, and it is so pretty. It's seriously crazy that God made the world that way and that we have things like that to look at. But when I went with my family, something that really struck me is that for most of the Grand Canyon, they don't really have like a fence or like a guardrail. You can kind of just walk up to the very edge and lean over, and there's nothing stopping you. And for me, I stayed far away. I did not want to get close to that edge. But my sister, Danae, she likes to take risk a little bit more. And so she went and was standing at the very edge. Wow, it looks so nice in there. It's so cool. And me and my family, we are like freaking out. I'm crying, thinking that I'm going to witness my sister's death. And we're like, get away, stop, no, don't get there. We were so nervous because she was getting so close that it looked like at any point she could fall. And actually, this happens a lot. In fact, it's recorded that around 11 people fall into the Grand Canyon every single year. You think they would build fences, right? But this is what happens when we allow lust to get a hold of our hearts. We may think we've got it under control. We may think, no, I'm not going to fall. I'm just going to stand at the edge. I'm actually really scared I'm going to fall right now. We think, no, it's not going to happen to me. I've got this. But then at any moment, we could lose our balance. We could take one wrong step, and we've fallen off. And it's really hard to come back. So now that we know why lust is a deadly sin, you're like, okay, Avery, you've convicted me enough, I know. What do we do about it? How do we deal with lust? Well, if you're taking notes on your outlines, the first point is this, is to take drastic measures. Take drastic measures. Look at what Jesus told us to do in the verse we were reading. He says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, to be clear, Jesus isn't asking us to mutilate ourselves. He's not saying, just get rid of your hands, your eyes, no big deal. That's not what he's saying. What he is saying, though, is that we can't just do something small. We have to take extreme measures. We have to take some big steps. He uses the analogy of an eye, which represents what we allow ourselves to look at, what we take in. And then in the same way, he uses the analogy of a hand, which represents what we allow ourselves to do. Your problems are not going to go away by themselves. You may think, eventually I'll grow out of this. Eventually it'll be fine. It's never going to affect me that much. But if you don't take some big steps, if you don't make some drastic changes in your life, it's always going to stay that way. And for you, it might look different. There might be different ways that you can do this. Maybe you need to put up some blockers on your computer or your phone that just doesn't allow you to go on those websites that you've been going on. Maybe it actually means that you need to keep your device out of your room late at night so that you don't get tempted. Maybe it means you need to cut out some friends in your life who are kind of a bad influence and encourage you to do the wrong thing. Or maybe you need to get an accountability partner, someone who you can just be brutally honest with and share all the stuff you've been struggling with. We need to stop viewing ourselves as victims. Oh, lust is happening to me. This I can't control it. Because we have the power to do something about it. My second point is this, and you can write this down in your notes, is to be aware of boredom and stress. Be aware of boredom and stress. There's a story in the Bible of King David, and he was known as a man after God's own heart. In fact, if you've ever heard the story of David and Goliath, it's that same guy. He slayed a giant. He went on to be king. Everybody loved him. He defeated tons of armies until suddenly things went sideways, and he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. If we read in 2 Samuel 11, it says, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, you can underline that, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. But David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. Now, you might hear this part of the story and think, okay, well, this doesn't really sound like it's David's fault, He's just, staying in his palace, which is where he lives. He's going on the roof, and he just so happens to see someone bathing. You know what? They probably should have been inside in the shower with the curtain around. They should have known someone was going to see them. But the fact of the matter is that David wasn't where he was supposed to be. If we look back at the verse, it says, at the time when kings go off to war, David remained in Jerusalem. See, usually what kings would do is they were the leader of the army. So when there was a war, they were the first ones to go in. They would stay with their troops and they'd be leading them, and that's where he was supposed to be. But for some reason this time, David decided, I'm going to stay back this time. You guys go ahead. And I'm sure that as he was at home, just doing his own thing, he probably started to get a little bit bored. Maybe he was stressed about how his army was doing. He hadn't heard back in a while, and he let his mind wander. This is what happens when you're in the wrong place. This is what happens when you allow boredom and stress to cloud your judgment. See, if you know that being alone in your room is when you get most tempted, maybe you need to get out of there. If you know that staying late at your girlfriend's house usually leads to some bad decisions, maybe you guys need to go somewhere else. If you know that around exam season is when you get really stressed and you're tempted to do some things that maybe you're going to regret later, talk to somebody about it. It's often when we're bored and stressed that lust loves to come in and tempt us. See, studies show that when a thought comes into your mind, you have about 5 seconds to decide what you're going to do about it. It's kind of like the 5-second rule with food on the ground, although I don't know if that's legitimate. But you have 5 seconds to decide, am I going to give in? Or am I going to turn away? Am I going to let lust consume my mind? Or am I going to turn to Jesus? 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So when a thought comes in, when something comes in that you're like, I don't know if this is right, this seems kind of impure, grab that thought while you have the chance. Don't give in. Because often when we give in, it usually turns into something more. See how the story goes for David is he didn't just stop at seeing this woman bathing. He could have just gone inside and decided, I'm not going to do anything about this. But no, he sent someone to go and get her and bring her to him. Her name was Bathsheba. He brought Bathsheba in and he slept with her. And then later on, found out that he got her pregnant. And then instead of owning up to his mistake, he decided, you know what, I don't want anyone to find out. I don't want her husband to find out. And so he got her husband killed off in war. If David had just taken that thought captive, if he had just said, you know what, this is not from God, I'm going to turn the other way, then he could have avoided all this pain, all these mistakes. But instead he didn't. And it led him down a dangerous path that hurt a lot of people. So my question for you is, what thoughts do you need to take captive tonight before they get any worse? What thoughts do you need to grab a hold of before it's too late? My last point, it's on your outline, is to realize that lust is a substitute for love. Realize that lust is a substitute for love. Now, all of us want to be loved. Even if you are the most introverted person and you think, I don't need anyone in my life. We all have this innate desire to be loved. We do. And we trick ourselves into believing that lust will somehow fulfill that lust will be enough, but it's not. It's like a substitute teacher. They come into your classroom and maybe they're great. Maybe they're super nice, but they're just not the same as your real teacher. They don't know about all the progress that you've done throughout the semester. They can't answer every question. They don't have the same type of relationship with you. It's not the same. See, lust can never live up to what love is because it lacks holiness. It fails to honor the other person. If you are going after lust and you think this will satisfy me, this will be enough, this is going to replace the lack of love that I feel from everybody else, guess what? It's not. You're going after the wrong thing because it will never satisfy. Lust overpromises and it underdelivers. 1 John chapter 2 says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever." See, the things that we lust after, they're not going to last. Sex, money, some sort of position, it's all going to fade away. And it's never going to be enough. It's a substitute for real love. So if you want to know what real love is, if you're tired of replacing it with lust and it not being enough, then that means we need to come back to the original love of our Father. And I'm not talking about your biological father. I'm talking about your heavenly Father who loved you so much that he sent down his one and only Son, Jesus, down to the earth to live a perfect, sinless life. And then after 33 years, this perfect Jesus was crucified on the cross, a gruesome death, though he was innocent for our sins. And he was raised to life so that we could be free from all the shame, all the things that tied us down, from every sin that we've ever committed and ever will commit. That's love. And if you want to accept that love for the first time, I'm going to give you an opportunity in just a moment. Now, to do all this, to take drastic measures, to be aware of boredom and stress, to recognize that lust is a substitute for love, you're going to need some help. It's going to take some work. None of this is going to work if you're running on empty. Just like a car is not going to work if it doesn't have any gas in it. Which leads me to my big idea, which kind of sums up everything that we've been talking about today. It's on your outline. And it's this. In order to move away from lust, we need to move closer to God. In order to move away from lust, we need to move closer to God. See, fighting against lust is not just about resisting. It's not just about saying no. It's not just about cutting these things out of your life and that's it. Because eventually, you're going to get tired. You're going to give in. It's like fighting a battle without a weapon. It's like running a race without having any water. You're going to give up at some point. See, if we're going to cut these things out of our minds, if we're going to rid our minds of lust, then we need to fill it with something else. We need to fill it with Jesus. Philippians 4:8 says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. It's by moving closer to God, the things that he calls us to, the things that he deems as excellent and praiseworthy, that we'll be able to move away from lust. See, if your mindset is just on saying no, if it's just on building this fence around you, then you're still going to feel trapped. You're still going to feel like, I can't really move, I don't feel free, and you won't be living in the freedom that God has for you. Jesus died so that we could be free from our sins, not bound by them, not trapped. So you don't have to do it alone. If you're struggling with lust, if you're struggling with anything, really invite God in to help you. Invite him in. He wants to be part of it, even if it's messy, even if you feel ashamed, he wants to be in it. In order to move away from lust, we need to move closer to God. Whatever your struggle, he wants you to be free from it. He wants to help you. And if you want to accept that help, if you want to accept his love even for the first time, if you're done with looking for substitutes and you're saying, no, I want the original love that God gives me, and you want to do that tonight, then I would just invite all of us to bow our heads and close our eyes.